Hi, I'm Chuck Dorsett for Weaver Leather Supply. Let's make a no-scratch belt, or I often hear these called a mechanic's belt. There's no exposed buckle, so we're not going to scratch the finish on a beautiful car. But also, for those of us that want no bling, no flash, perfect way to go. All right, so anything I use in this video, weaverleathersupply.com, or check below. We've got links there, going to take you straight to the website. Also, if you want to know when our videos release, just click your notifications. You'll know exactly when these come out. So let's step over to our pattern table, look at a very simple pattern. We've got a very easy pattern here to make a great belt. We've got a digital pick. We'll jump over to that shortly, but here's what we're doing. All we need, a belt strap, a billet, and a keeper. Now right here, this is called a two-prong scratchless belt buckle. That literally is the name of that. So on our small billet here, we're going to sandwich this between our main belt strap and our billet. So right here, we've got two holes. That's for our prongs. Now, these are simply marks. We're going to mark that because that's where we'll start and stop our stitch line. Right here, we've got two small holes. We'll sink a keeper right there. It's going to be a very low profile belt. All right, so over to our digital pick. So on both our strap and our billet, 1.5 inches or 3.81 centimeters. Now on our main strap, we're going to come in 1.25 of an inch on one end. We've got our waist size. Then we're going to add 7 inches on the other end so we can expand. On our small billet, 1.5 wide there too, 4.5 long. So we've got our starts and our stops for our stitch line. We've got our 2 rivet holes for our keeper and our 2 holes for our prong. So that's really all we've got. Let's step over to our main table, cut some leather. For our main strap, we're going to go with a pre-cut belt blank. For those of us who are new to the craft, very inexpensive way to go to get a quality piece of leather. We're going to come back to this though. But before we do that, let's just double check. 1.5 wide, that's exactly what we need. So let's set that aside, and right here, this is a single shoulder, in my opinion, one of the best buys for us crafters. It's a smaller cut, very affordable, and we've got this in a number of weights. So let's do this. We've got an 8 to 9 ounce for our main body. Let's back off to a 4 to 5 ounce here. So right here, we need 4.5 by 1.5. Let's just cut this out. We could absolutely use our strapper, but just so happens, our arms here, 1 inch, 1.5 inch, both very common widths. So let's drop that on our edge, get a good cut, okay? Now let's trim this down to size 4.5 inches. Good. All right, we've got that. Now, one piece I did not put on our pattern, should have, but it's just a keeper. So on our keeper, we're going to go 3/8 of an inch wide by 4 inches long. So how about we use our wooden strap cutter? Let's bring this back down to 3/8 of an inch. Close that, give it just a little extra tight, and let's strap this out. Good, I've got plenty of room there actually to make another one. I've got a small drawer of keepers, so when I need to, I can just pull one out. All right, so we've got 4 inches. Let's bring that down. All right, so back over to our main strap. Like I said, we're gonna go with a natural strap belt blank. For those of us that are new to the craft, great way to go. We don't have to buy a large piece of leather to cut out one belt blank. But a good point. If we do strap from a larger piece, the cost of our blank is about 1/3 of what we would pay just for the blank. Now, Weaver, we've got this in multiple leathers. We have these with the holes, the oblong, even edge coat. We've got some beautiful blanks. All right, so over here on our pattern, this shows for our waist size, we're coming in 1.25 of an inch. That may sound confusing. It isn't. All that means, so we're going to lay in our buckle right there. So when we square that to the end, the center between the two prongs is 1.25 inch. So let's do this. Let's put our thumb right on 1.25 inch and let's pull that down square to the end. All right. On this end, for our sizing, I'm about a 35-inch waist. So what I'd like to do is I want to put my second hole on 35 so I can come in a little bit and go out a good bit. So let's mark these with our awl. Good. Now we're going to come out 2 inches. Let's make a mark right there. That's where we'll hit our English point, okay? So this is marked and ready to go. Let's step over right here to our billet. Let's mark this. and our marks for our stops and starts on our sewing. We may have to come back and mark those again because we're going to groove that, but we can certainly do that. Now, really on our keeper, don't necessarily need to mark this, but let's just go ahead and drop a mark. Well, there we go. All right, let's take these over to our punch table, punch some holes, and an English point. I didn't mention this, but this is our pattern sheeting. We see this in most of our videos. I love it for patterns. It's inexpensive, easy to mark, easy to cut, and durable. But here's where I'm actually going with this. So when we've got a small, simple piece, we're only going to make one of something. I am notorious for just measuring and marking out on the leather. Well, I am always wrong. Again, inexpensive and easy to work with. Let's go ahead and take the time to make our pattern. Then if something's wrong, we know what's wrong and we can correct it. But also, we can use these across multiple projects, okay? So let's start right here with our keeper. We're going to go with our compound action revolving punch. If you're new to leathercraft and you have trouble punching through thicker leathers, this is going to make it so easy, okay? So right here, we're going to use 2 small double cap rivets. So I'm going to come up to about the second hole. Let's punch our marks. Okay, we've got that. Now, let's step over to our main strap here. With this, let's start with an English punch. This is a 1.5 inch. It's a belt tip punch. So, on the end, we've got our mark there. I'm going to drop that in just to where I can see a little daylight on either of our wings. And there we go. We've got a nice, even belt tip. And right here on our size holes, let's go up to about maybe the 4th or 5th sized hole, and let's punch. At our last punch, okay, that looks clean and straight thanks to a good pattern. Over to our small billet. So right here, let's again go with the largest or the second largest tube. Let's punch for our 2 prong holes. Good. Now back over here for our keepers. Again, the second tube. Let's punch these 2. And now let's make sure we don't punch our stops and our starts for our sewing. Okay. One more step. Let's flip this around. All right, our prongs are going to go towards the end. Let's flip that over. Now, we could use a round corner here, but actually let's just clip this because we'll use this later when we drop in our chisel. Good, that's going to meet up nicely. Okay, back to our main table. Everything looks good thus far, so now let's work on our edges. We're going to add a groove and an edger. So on our groover, I like to set this about 1/8 inch. To me, that's not too far in, not too close to the edge. But what I want to do is when I'm grooving 2 pieces that are going to go together, let's make sure we don't change the adjustment there. So let's start on our billet with our groover. Let's groove all the way around. And we've got that. Okay, now for a 4 to 5 ounce, let's go with our number 1 edger. We've got that. Okay, over to our main strap. Now on this, again, same setting, but we'll go to a number 2 edger. So let's groove all the way around. And there we are. That is a nice touch. Okay, so over to a number 2 edger on the face, then we'll do the flesh side. Easily done there, and that's a nice touch. Now on our back side, let's do this. Let's take our billet, butt that to the end, and just put 2 small marks there. That's where we're going to start our edge. So I'm going to start there and work my way around. Now it's never as easy to edge the flesh side. Good, there we go, but that sets us up to round and slick our edges. Okay, let's step over to our punch table, drop in our chisel line. We're going to make this easy on ourselves. Here's what I'm talking about. We could tape or glue these together long enough to get our chisel line in. The problem is that now we're trying to get a chisel through 12 to 14 ounce leather. We can do it. The problem is getting that chisel back out. We're going to ream out the holes. Second issue, it's almost impossible to get that chisel exactly straight up and down going through that much leather. So what will happen? We've got a pretty stitch line here, squirrely stitch line here. So we're just going to chisel these separately. It's easy to do, and they're going to line up nicely because we're going to use an 1/8 inch flat chisel. This gives us a little room for error, but in all honesty, this is going to be easy to line up. So let's start right here. Now, I want to make sure I'm on my poly board. I don't want to punch into my marble, which when we're new, that can happen. But also, when we've got a little experience, yeah, it can happen too. So let's start right here. I'm going to take my 4-tine. Let's just center that right between those two incoming groove lines. And let's make sure we get that chisel all the way through the leather. That will help us when we're sewing. Okay, over here, same thing. Good, we've got that. Okay, now let's take our single tine, and I'm going to put 1 tine in each corner. Much easier to get a single tine through that. Okay, so let's take our 4, and I'm going to line this up by setting the first tine right over the last hole. I want the inside of that first tine on the outside of that last hole edge. And let's just hit that a little bit. There we go. Now I know where my next chisel needs to be, and I'm going to keep a consistent distance between that hole and our next set. Okay, we've got that. Now we've got our stop down here. So first tine, last hole. And let's do one more. Now a keeper is going to sit right there. So if we're a little short of that mark, not going to make any difference. Okay, going to do the same thing on this side. Okay, we've got that. Now on this end, let's bring the outside of this tine right to that mark, and let's drop in 4. Same on this side. Okay, easy enough there. So now we're just going to line this up. So this edge is going to match that edge. All we have to do, let's square these to the end. And good, let's just drop in our chisel holes in the same place. And those are going to match up nicely, and it's so much easier on our hands. We're going to have a pretty stitch line on both sides. So down here, let's match those. But then let's drop in one more hole. Good. That way we'll secure that flap down. Same thing on this side. And one more. Now you'll notice we're not going across our strap. We don't want to sew across a strap, and I see that on every cheap belt in every store. If we chisel across, what's going to happen is we're taking out about half the leather. This belt will separate there. All right, so let's add some dye to this, some top coat, then we'll knock it together. About 95% of the nose scratcher mechanic belts I see out there, classic black, and it looks good. But let's go a different route. We're going to go with our Pro Dye in a walnut. This is a gorgeous brown. Now we're going to dip dye this. So it will typically take a little more dye than what's in our 4-ounce bottles to fill our bin. But this is a super easy way to dye leather, and it's going to be beautifully consistent. One more thing. These make great dye bins. This is just a to-go tray from most any restaurant when we take a doggy bag home. The only downside to this is the color. It's hard to tell if we've got this clean after we've dyed. So let's just go with a little bit larger bin. Now I'm going to take a hook. This is just cheap wire from any hardware store, and this makes a good hook. So let's take our main strap and let's slowly run through our dye. Let's let some of that excess dye drain off. And there we are. How easy is it to dye leather? We're going to leave that right where it is. Let's do our billet. Now typically with a lighter weight, a 4 to 5, I want to give that a little less time in the die, and then same with our keeper. And there we are, super easy. I've got dye on virtually nothing, a little bit on my gloves, and absolutely on our project. Let's give this about 2 hours dry time. In that time, I'm going to do some cleanup. Ample dry time, and our belt looks good. We can even see the natural lines in the leather. Very nice. So let's go with a top coat, my all-time favorite. This is a saddle lac. It's easy to apply. It's not going to change the color of our dye, and it's going to dry in about 1 minute. Now, the big points to this: got to have good ventilation, lacquer based. But secondly, our can cannot be cold. We need this room temp or a little bit above. But the one thing I want to do here is go as light as I can. This is not a conditioner, and it's not a sealant. It is simply a top coat. So let's start right here. In fact, let's jump over to this. Let's go with our little billet first. So I'm going to hold my can about 10 inches out, and I'm just going to try to hit an area about 1.5 inches wide. So I'll make one quick pass, flip it around, do the same, walk away. And that's all we do. Let's leave that where it is. I'm going to do the same thing to our keeper and our belt. And there we are. That looks good. Let's leave it right where it is. Give this just about 2, maybe 3 minutes. And a little more dry time. That looks good. Very nice. Now, I said let's just make one quick pass across, flip it, do the same. Without thinking about it, I did 2 passes. I went a little bit heavy on this, but actually it looks pretty good. So let's take this, add our keeper, we'll drop in our buckle, sew it together, and we're done. This is going to look a little confusing. It isn't. Once we see this go together, it'll make sense. Now, on our revolving punch, we were a little bit specific on the size hole. Here's why. I just don't want my rivet swimming around in that hole. It brings up all kinds of problems. The biggest being durability. So let's start right here. On our billet, I'm going to take my small double cap, and I'm going to come through from the top grain. Let's flip that over. Let's set that. Now, this is our 4-piece setter set. It's a great way to go. We've got a rivet setter, but we can also set segment snaps, line 20 and 24, and that anvil comes in very handy. So let's set our rivet here. Good, we've got that. Now, let's take a double cap. We're going to do the same thing. Let's come around this side. I'm going to go right to that. One of the things I love about the double caps is you can snap the cap on it. So you could take it off if you need to. It's not set, but now we can work with this. So let's take our anvil, equally helpful piece from that 4-piece set. So let's lay that in and set that rivet. Just double check we've got a good set there. All right, there we go. Our keeper is set. Let's go glue in our buckle. We're going to use a contact cement to glue our 2 pieces together. Now, that's not really going to work on the metal. Doesn't have to, because first off, the holes, there we go, that will hold that in place. But also, if we have glue all the way around that, that's not going to move for years to come. So let's go with our S18. Great contact cement, one of my favorites. So on this piece, I'm going to cover everything right to the edge. Down here, I'm just going to come down. In fact, we can mark this with a scribe if we want. We can lay this in and mark it, but I can see where our last 2 chisel holes are, so let's just stop our glue right there. So with our contact cement, we need glue on both sides, then we'll let that dry, adhere together. Good, let's get right to our edges. Now, we didn't bevel on the flesh side on either of these, so those are going to meet nicely. So over to this piece, let's just cover everything. Don't necessarily need to worry about the keeper. And let's make sure we get right to the edge all the way around. Very nice. So now let's give this just a couple of minutes. Let that dry. We'll glue these together. And our last bit of dry time, what we're looking for with the contact cement. Looks dry, feels dry, but it's good and tacky. So let's insert this. We want our prongs towards the belt. And now let's do our best to lay this in as clean as we can. And our edges meet nicely, very good. Now if it doesn't clamp down or glue down right there, that's no issue. We're going to sew right up to that keeper. All right, let's put a stitch line in this. Let's do a quick equipment rundown for hand sewing first off. Right here, our trusty sewing pony. This is actually made to sit on. Holds our project right in front of us. But I like to sew standing up. I've got better reach, better vision, and more upper body strength. So I like to C-clamp this to my table. One good trick on this. Right here, small piece of tape over that lever, because when we're sewing, our thread will grab that and release our project, not just once. On our thread, Ritza, we've got some beautiful colors in this. I like the 0.8 millimeter. That's a good all-around thread. The 0.6, that's great for, say, something like wallets, smaller projects, but that's my all-time favorite. Let's go with the brown there. So last up on our needles, so let's go with our John James. This is the number 18. It's a good all-around hand sewing needle. It's a good size. So on our project here, we're going to start just inside our keeper. We're going to sew around, come back to that point, and then we'll be able to hide our knot right under there. So let's start with a simple saddler stitch, one needle. Now I've got a needle on both ends, but let's put one needle through that first hole. Let's even out our distance. Now I'd like about 4 times my distance. We're going to waste a little thread there, but I prefer that over coming up short. So in our next hole, and look how nicely these are lining up. So I'm going to take both needles. I'm going to come through about halfway. Now what I'll do is we can actually push more on the thread than the needle to get that go through. But now let's make an X. I'm going to move my fingers from the eye to the tip. There we go. Let's pull that through. Now let's don't give that too much tension, but when I pull that, I'd like to see that thread sink down just a little bit below the top grain. And down to our last hole. Actually, these holes have lined up nicely. We've got a good meet right across there. So on our last hole, let's come through just the billet. Pull that out from between the 2 plies. Right here, same thing. If I can find the hole. Through the 2. Okay, now let's tie a square knot right here. So, right over left, circle around. Tighten that down in there good. Left or right, circle around, and the same thing. Good. And this pair of long reach scissors, these have absolutely become my go-to in my shop. So let's give that a little bit of a tug. Good. Snip that off. And just with our fingernail, we can press that back in there. We don't even see the knot. Okay, I'm going to get another piece of thread. Then we'll do these 2 pieces. And there we are. Okay, one good point here. We used our flat chisel. That gives us a little more room for error. These lined up nicely. All right, so on our end here, we're going to start on the outside and work our way in and tie our knot right there. So right here, we've got one hole that's actually off the end of our billet. So let's come through that first. Now let's go to our billet and sew up to this point. And there we are. Good. I'm going to do the same thing to this side. And we've got that okay. What I do notice, I went a little too far on my glue. I should have used an awl. Okay, 2 quick easy steps and we're done. Our no scratch belt is done absolutely and it looks good. Solid and sturdy, but there are 2 more things I'd like to do. Well, first off, let's hammer down our stitch line. Now I say hammer down, really I mean more tap down. but this is going to close the holes up. It's going to sink that thread down into the groove line and spread that thread out a little bit. So on our mallet, I love my rawhide mallet. This is going on 10 years of use, and it looks like it. Well, we can see where I always hit the tools, but right down here, smooth. So let's set this on the edge of our marble, and now let's just tap down that stitch line. And we can always switch that over to this side to avoid both our buckle and our keeper. So same over here. And there we are. Okay, let's go slick our edges. Let's slick the edges on our belt. That's going to be a nice touch. So we're going to go with our gum tragicant. They're better known simply as gum trag. This is a great burnishing agent. It's going to give us a nice slick. So right here I've got some just on a piece of our pattern sheeting. All kinds of ways to use that in our shop. But one thing, on our burnisher here, we've got a groove. That's going to be good for 8 to 9, but we've got a 4 to 5 and an 8 to 9 there. That's not going to be wide enough to do that. It's no issue, because on each of these cuts, right up to our shank, we've got a curved inside. So we can actually use that. We'll work at one side, then we'll flip it over, work at the other side. It's going to work the same way. But I'd like to add this simply with a rag, because this can darken the back side of our belt. I don't want that. I just want that on our edges. So let's just take some of this on our rag, and let's just hit our edges. And there we go. Looks like we've got some good coverage there. Now let's take our rag and just wipe off the excess, down and back. And there we are. Okay, let's start to slick out here with our groove. And it looks like we've got a good slick all the way around. Well, that is one good looking belt. How about the fit? We've got a clean, durable, handmade leather belt, and the fit on the nose. That's what we were looking for. Now, as a leather crafter, it's a little bit odd to me not to have a buckle on my belt. Belts are something that we do. And if we're going to make a belt, we're going to put a beautiful buckle on it. But at the same time, I'm not leaning over a car with a $20,000 finish. So I know there's someone in our world that is going to appreciate a beautiful handmade gift. I hope you have a great time with your no scratch belt. Good luck with your projects.